and welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli, that's Danny Kanell, that's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Fired up to get you set for the season ahead over the course of the next hour, where we will, among other things, be showing you our college football playoff bracket predictions. That's right, bracketology in August. What else could you possibly ask for? Each of us has put together our projected college football playoff bracket, and even better than that, we're going to play it out and tell you who ends up winning it all. But first, a little bit of news that we did not get to address on our Monday show, because right as the show was wrapping up, the AP Top 25 preseason poll was released. Texas does end up as the number one team in the country, but at number two, it is not the Ohio State Buckeyes. No, the AP voters have made it Penn State. Ohio State checks in at number 3. Clemson at number 4. You can see the rest of the top 10 here on your screen if you're watching us on CBS Sports Network. DK, were you surprised at all by some of the changes that the AP had in relation to the coaches poll? You know, Penn State, Clemson, among the differences that we've seen between the two.
So I don't even like saying this out loud because, all due respect to our brothers and sisters who are in media, I thought coaches would have known more about football, and yet I think the AP voters actually got it right by bumping up Penn State a notch, and most importantly, giving Clemson a little bit more respect than they were shown from the coaches, having them jump up a couple spots into that 4 slot. So I was pleasantly surprised to see a little bit of tweak there from the AP voters. That was the difference that I noticed.
I'm not that surprised by it, because I do feel like coaches, when they put together their ballots, like, they are still very much more oriented in what has happened. And, like, you know, Ohio State winning a national title last year is still going to carry weight with the coaches in their polling, whereas the media members of the AP poll are probably a bit more forward-looking and looking at the narratives as far as Penn State having so much coming back from last year's team. But for me, the biggest takeaway is not just that Penn State is second, but how close they were to Texas to being first overall. There's only a 5-point gap between the two of them, and that's just my general takeaway for the entire top 10. There's the gap between the top 8 teams in there is very small. It's smaller than the gap was between first and sixth last year in the preseason AP poll. So I think it's a great reflection of just how everybody feels about college football heading into 2025, where we all know who the good teams are. We just have no idea what order they're going to finish in and who's going to prove to be the best.
But
Tom, we know who the most talented teams are, but do we actually know who the best teams are? I don't know. Like, I think that's part of the mystery here. And that's because these teams are back to being more like college-aged kids. Before, we had all these COVID kids where, you know, if you missed on a position, you could go out and get like a 23, 24-year-old transfer from the MAC or from the Sun Belt who would, like, at least he didn't stink. He may not have been good, but you generally knew kind of like there's a certain baseline floor. With a lot of these teams, we don't know. Like, the bottom could drop out of some of these guys in the top 10. And I think to that point that Tom made, 6 different teams in the AP got a first place vote. I've been doing this for a long time. When's the last time that happened? I can't recall. I think they generally got the top 10 grouping right. And then after that, honestly, like 11 down to, 37, eyeballing this with Nebraska, you could pretty much throw 11, 37 in some random order, and I'd have a hard time, like, strongly disagreeing with it. A little bit too much Big 12 for my taste, because those teams don't really spend and they don't really send guys to the draft. But, you know, it is what it is. I think there's some more talented teams than them who were left unranked.
So, to your question, can I answer that? Because I actually went and looked this up the last time we had 6 teams receiving, because it's been driving me nuts, because I'm like, I can't remember when we've seen this wide open of a season. 2016, there were 7 teams that received a first place vote. Alabama was preseason number 1. Clemson, Oklahoma, Florida State all received it. LSU had 1. Ohio State had 1. Michigan had 1 vote. So even like the back end, there were a couple with 1 vote. But 2016 was the last time. So almost a decade since we've had this many teams that you could legitimately feel like, yeah, that's not crazy.
So which one's going to finish unranked? Because in 29 of the last 31 years, a top 10 team has finished the season unranked. Because I agree with you, Bud, that top 10 grouping looks like a fair grouping, but history has shown that at least one of these teams is going to end up having, as you mentioned, the bottom fall out. So, Bud, I'll kick this right back to you first. One top 10 team that has the potential to finish unranked.
Well, for hosts on this show, I think there are 4 candidates for this. If I get to go first, I'm going to take LSU. We've already seen Garrett Nussmeier get banged up, and they're saying it's not a big deal, and he just has a leg sleeve on. And I just like this guy's been banged up before. What if he gets banged up more and decides to shut it down and just think about the draft, right? They have a very difficult schedule there at LSU. They have a hard opener at Clemson. Offensive line's been having a ton of trouble so far in fall camp from what I've been reading. So I'm going to go ahead and take LSU. If they finish 8-4, especially if a couple of those 4 are blowout losses, I think they could finish unranked. Not they will, but that's my top choice from this list.
All right, so I was looking through this list. I have to be careful because I don't want to look stupid because we're doing our playoff predictions later, so I make sure I don't choose any of those teams. I think LSU was a great option. I probably would have taken them. Why not? I mean, Miami fans are already ticked off because in our bold predictions, I said they could miss a bowl. I'm not going that far, but the schedule is really rough. I think there's a chance they could finish the season 8-4. They have Notre Dame, again, a team that I actually am a believer in, that they're an underdog at home. They have Florida. They have Florida State on the road. They have, then they have SMU on the road. Who knows? Is there another slip up in there? Louisville comes to town. I worry a little bit about Carson Beck, who he's throwing to, coming off a major injury. There's some question marks about me for that working and expecting it to work. I think they're probably a little bit too high at 10 anyway. So if I think that, I'll go ahead and say they're the team that finishes outside.
Miami probably would have been my pick, but since Danny just took them, let's go a little bit further up the board. Maybe the one that's, I think, again, this is like an absolute worst case scenario. Like you're trying to figure out a team where a few things go wrong, the bottom can fall out. Well, Oregon's already lost Evan Stewart for the year. We've spent a lot of time talking about DeCorian Moore, their 5-star freshman receiver, who we all think is going to be a star. But what if he's not? What if DeCorian Moore doesn't step up? What if, Dante Moore at quarterback or Austin Novosad, if he ends up getting the job, don't really reach the same heights that we saw with Dylan Gabriel and Bo Nix the last few years? What if the guys that they have to replace on their offensive line don't hit as early in that offensive line struggles? This is an offense that could possibly have a bad season. Now, when I look at their schedule, I don't know if they could have a poor enough record to be ranked at all, just be left off the ballot, the top 25. But there is a possibility where that team could really finish well below our preseason top 10 expectations. So I'll go with the Ducks.
When we talk about Oregon's worst case scenario, it's 8-4. But 8-4, again, depending on how it goes, could end up leaving you unranked. I think that's a good option. Let's get a little bit more dangerous. Like everything goes horribly wrong. How about the Notre Dame Fighting Irish? A team that was the national runner-up 1 year ago, but has some tricky spots on the schedule. Now, not a lot. That ACC draw that they get does give them a lot of favorable opportunities that they would not get if they were playing in the Big Ten or if they were playing in the SEC. But that also might mean that if you don't play well in your quality games against quality opponents, you get upset once along the way, you could find yourself slipping out of control. Again, it would not be my first choice here, but just to spotlight another opportunity, especially thinking about the quarterback position, because CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie are still battling. Sometimes you're excited about that quarterback battle continuing. Sometimes you're like, man, I really wish if we were hearing that somebody, maybe in this case CJ Carr, was going ahead and taking that job by the horns. So I like Oregon. I like Miami, LSU, all good calls. If I was to spotlight one more, I'll throw the Fighting Irish on there. Tom, you winced a little bit. You think that's getting a little bit too aggressive and reckless?
No, I don't. Yeah, it's the schedule they've got some tougher games. Like obviously there are the marquee games, but there are some games where if they struggle and they deal with injuries, they could possibly lose them. I think it's hard when you're looking at this because these are all teams we expect to be good. And now we've listed 40% of those top 10 teams as possibilities. So just history suggests it will be one of them. And it feels like it's far-fetched right now, but it was just as far-fetched the last few years when it's been happening to the team year after year.
Yeah, 29 of the last 31 years have had a team from the top 10 finish outside the top 25. But every single season of the college football playoff era, the eventual national champion has been in the preseason AP top 10. So we're picking the group apart, but it probably is the national champion, at least in the playoff era. Well, speaking of that college football playoff, it's time for us to do the bracketology dance. That's right. We show you the 12 teams we think will fill out the college football playoff. We'll break it down, pick it, and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. It's time for us to reveal our college football playoff bracket projections. Tom Fornelli, you get to be the bracketologist in the spotlight today. We'll be playing it out in a little bit, but right now, show me your field of 12 and explain to us how we got there.
All right. Well, I'll tell you how I got there. What I did was I threw a bunch of names in a hat and I picked them out one by one. No, I tried to play this out like we just talked in the last segment about how wide open things feel going into the year. So Ohio State, I have winning the Big Ten. I know that there's a lot of replacements there, but I still think they're the most talented team in that league, regardless of what Penn State has coming back. So I've got them winning the Big Ten, being the number 1 seed. LSU, I feel like I'm higher on than everybody. I just think that they have a very high ceiling this year, and if they hit it, they will be one of the best teams in the country. I've got them winning the SEC. Clemson wins the ACC, gets the 3 seed. Notre Dame, Chip, you have them falling out of the top 10 entirely. You are a Fighting Irish hater, not me. I've got them earning a bye, taking advantage of the new format that's going forward where they no longer reserve byes for conference champs. And then after that, Georgia, I have losing the SEC championship, so they're 5th. Penn State's losing in the Big Ten, so I've got them 6th. Alabama and Texas both barely miss out on Atlanta, but they're the next top seeds because their overall records and resumes. Kansas State, as my Big 12 champ, gets in at 9, which is, probably going to be in line with a team that's probably lost at least 2, maybe even 3 games. Miami, I think, gets the ACC 2 spots, followed by Oregon at 11 and Boise State as the G5. Now, the one thing that stands out, maybe you didn't notice, only 3 Big Ten teams. When I look at the Big Ten this year, I feel confident about those 3. And after that, there's a whole lot of shrugs and I need to see to be sure kind of action going on. So I think that when you look at the Big Ten this year, they could be this year's SEC where that second tier of the league kind of beats up on each other and costs them that 4th spot.
Interesting look. Bud, why don't you take us to your bracket? How'd you line them up?
Yeah, guys, so I'm actually not that dissimilar to what Tom has here. In fact, I run my model almost every day. Sometimes it spits out really fun ones. I thought this one was kind of fun. To Tom's point about the Big Ten, I do think there's a real chance that the 3-4, at least in my model, Oregon and Michigan, slide back a little bit. And I think like 5, 6, 7, 8 in the Big Ten is far improved. So those teams might pick up extra losses. I've had some model runs where we only have 2 Big Ten teams. But with this one, Georgia's favored every game. They have an awesome home schedule this year. I'll still take Ohio State to win the Big Ten until Penn State can beat a team that's top 15 in the power ratings or better, which it didn't do the entire year last year. And I am pretty high on Penn State, but still, like, you got to beat somebody that has real talent. Texas 3 with Arch Manning. Obviously, Penn State 4. Bama 5. Clemson 6. I think they are the class of the ACC. Notre Dame, Utah, I have winning the Big 12. Oregon, I do have slipping in with a couple losses. Miami, despite losses to Notre Dame here in this projection, I still have in. Oklahoma, who I think, one of Oklahoma, Florida, or LSU, I think gets into the playoff just with the quarterback talent that they have, with some of the defensive line talent that they have. And then I have Boise as your G5 rep. So that's my rundown here for today's model run. And stay tuned tomorrow. It could be totally different because this year feels wide open.
So, hold on. Before we get to Danny's bracket and my bracket, Oklahoma? I mean, that's got to be the one that stands out, right? I mean, we got to have a little bit more elaboration right there. Like this.
John Mateer's been sliding into Bud's Venmo.
I was gonna.
Yeah. I mean, come on, man. Like, how does this come together? Like, what is the? I understand that that's what your model spit out, but how does your brain tell you that we eventually get to Oklahoma in the college football playoff?
Sure. So if Oklahoma beats Michigan, the SEC is going to have a huge bragging rights chip over the Big Ten this year. Like, that's a pivotal game, and I do think Oklahoma will beat Michigan, because I don't like what Michigan did at receiver this year. I'm not really sure who Bryce Underwood is going to throw the football to. And I think Oklahoma will be more ready to win early in the season. So I think Oklahoma can go 9-3 and get in here. They do have a really nice defensive line. Secondary looks like it's coming together a little bit. Receivers way improved because simply not every single person on the roster is hurt. And the offensive line should be somewhat improved. And obviously, I think Venables turning over the offense to a guy who's a proven OC and not just his buddies like he had it running it last year is also a major improvement. So again, typically I'm getting one of Florida, LSU, or Oklahoma in the playoff out of the SEC. And in this model run, it came up Oklahoma.
Interesting. All right, DK, why don't you show us your 12?
All right, here we go. All you guys disrespecting the Penn State Nittany Lions when they've got everybody coming back to do something special. They have secured my top spot in the rankings. Clemson, again, another team that's returning their starter. I think they beat LSU at home. I think they should waltz through the ACC for the most part. So I've got them at the 2 seed. Bama as your SEC champion. Now that they've named a starter, I actually feel better about this. He's got a great offensive line. As long as he kind of manages it, doesn't screw it up, that defense should be good enough for me to win the SEC. And then I've got Ohio State at the 4 seed because I do think they beat Texas, who interestingly is not anywhere on my top 12, but I do think that win could reign pretty big for them throughout the season. I think Penn State and Ohio State split. I think Penn State loses the regular season matchup on the road in Columbus, but I think Penn State beats them in the Big Ten title to get that number 1 seed back from them. I do have Notre Dame. The schedule to me is just too easy. I've got Oregon. I'm going to trust Dan Lanning, trust the process of what he's been doing. I know it's a guy that doesn't have the experience, but I think that defense is going to be good once again. Kansas State, I've got the team from the Big 12. I think Avery Johnson takes a big step, but it is my only Big 12 team there. I've got Georgia and Ole Miss, both in from the SEC. Ole Miss, I think Austin Simmons works. The portal, once again, is rich for Lane Kiffin. I've got Louisville in there losing the ACC championship to Clemson, but still getting into the playoffs. And then I've got USC, a little bit of a surprise there. If it works with Jaden Maeva, I do think they're a team that, well, I'm going to believe Lincoln Riley. So they work close. They get some of those wins this season. And then Boise State wraps up the back end from the group of 5.
Well, you know, that USC makes me happy, and it makes me a little jealous because I don't have the Trojans in there, and normally that is the team I'm falling for. All right, I'm with you on Penn State. I've got Penn State as my number 1 seed in the bracket. I think they win the Big Ten. I see it playing out kind of like you do, maybe with a lose in Columbus, win in Indianapolis. Alabama is my 2 seed, the SEC champ. I do have Texas in my top 12, and not just that. I've got them as the 3 seed, the SEC runner-up, followed by Ohio State because they will be the Big Ten runner-up. Then I've got Georgia as my number 1 at large. I've got them finishing just ahead of Clemson because remember, just because you win your conference does not mean you get the speed pass all the way into the bye. So Georgia at 5, Clemson the ACC champion at 6. Notre Dame, I used them as a team that might be in consideration, but truthfully, Tom, you hold my feet to the fire. I've got the Fighting Irish inside of my projected playoff. You see them checking in at 7. Then, oh man, SEC homerism coming through. Ole Miss checking in at 8. Texas A&M checking in at 9. I am also going to trust Dan Lanning at 10. I've got Texas Tech as my Big 12 winner with the best team that oil money can buy. And then, look, Boise has a more talented roster than anybody in the Mountain West. You know who else has probably a more talented roster than the other teams in their conference? The Tulane Green Wave, at least by my eyes. So I've got Tulane winning and getting that 12 seed along the way. All right. So,
man, Chip, your Big Ten championship and SEC championship games don't mean anything but seeding in your world. Yeah, losers of the game still getting a bye. Look at big conference Patterson over here just gassing up the Big Ten and SEC.
Listen, you can't have these teams get punished for playing in a conference championship game. You can't lose the opportunity as long as the college football power brokers want to preserve these conference championship games. They'll make sure that you're not punished for playing in them. I think we saw that last year. I think we'll see that again. So that's why I've got Big Ten and SEC dominating those top 4 spots with the runners-up still getting the bye. Good look from Tom. Island watch coming up. What do I mean by that? There are a couple teams that we all put in our 12 that none of the other 3 did. So we're going to investigate that just a little bit more. And of course, we're going to play each one out. More college football playoff bracketology coming your way and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, we have revealed our college football playoff bracket projections. And before we play this thing out, wanted to spend a few minutes investigating all of our selections that we have. Bud, why don't you first talk to me about the Utah Utes winning the Big 12?
Yeah, Chip. So Utah's problem the last 2 years has been the lack of a quarterback because Cam Rising kept getting hurt and out for the year early in the season, or just chronically unavailable. I think they did a much better job now bringing over Jason Beck as their offensive coordinator. They have Devin Dampier to come in, who actually played for Beck. Beck has a history of quickly installing this offense and getting it to be awesome. Utah probably has the best offensive tackle combo in the nation. Both guys are projected first rounders in a lot of these mock drafts that you see early on. And when's the last time Utah had legitimately a bad defense? So if you give them I would say above average, or certainly in the Big 12, a well above average level offense, which I would project, strong run game and a nasty defense and a schedule that is honestly all the more favorable now that BYU lost its quarterback, I'm taking Utah to win the Big 12.
Are we sleeping on Utah? Is this an our fault, an me along the way?
I don't think we're sleeping on Utah. I think they're going to be good. I love Devin Dampier. He was great for me last year in my New Mexico over 1.5 win total. I knew very earlier in the season that was going to win thanks to that young man. So I'm thrilled for him to be at Utah, where I think that, as Bud mentioned, the Cam Rising situation the last few years is what really tanked that team, because the injury situation at QB just killed him. And I think he is an upgrade there if he can stay healthy. They have a great offensive line. For me, it's just the Big 12 in general. You don't know who's truly going to emerge as the elite team from that conference. But I do think talent-wise and coaching staff-wise, everything they have together, I think there's a very good argument to make that Utah has very good odds of doing so.
Again, I would always go back to what has Kyle Whittingham pretty much done consistently since he's been the head coach at Utah. He's competed for conference championships. And in a arguably tougher conference in the Pac-12, when it still existed, it was full, there were teams with better resources that he was beating for those championships. So I'm going to go back to the way I felt about him before last season was, if there's a void to be filled with Oklahoma and Texas gone to the SEC, who could fill it? I think Utah has to be in that conversation. Rough start in year one, but I don't think they've gone that far down. I think they'll be right back towards the top. So I'm not that surprised.
So when we're thinking about where we have no crossover, where we've got a little bit of an island situation, Danny, you're on an island with USC, also with no Texas, Trojans, Longhorns. What was some of your thinking behind those decisions?
So when we talked to Lincoln Riley, I felt like he had sort of a confidence about him that, and maybe that's how he is every offseason. Every coach feels good about him right now. But I actually like the changes they made to the strength staff to try to further himself from the narrative that he's a softer team. I think that was a big addition. Maybe it was made too late. The other thing, too, is if you trust anybody with quarterbacks, I think it's Lincoln Riley. He's a good talent evaluator. He's a good talent developer. Miller Moss got benched. They go with Jaden Maeva. They saw enough from him where they didn't go to the portal to get somebody in the offseason. I think the defense is there. And I do believe him when he said last year they were closer, and they were close in a lot of games. They get a couple of those to swing the other way. Schedule's pretty manageable for them. I think in the Big Ten, where there's this kind of top tier and they're right below it, I think they could play themselves back into it this season.
Yeah, you mentioned Lincoln and his optimism, going back to when we spent time with him in Vegas. Last year, coaches, they show up at those things and it's the offseason. They're kind of just going to, blow sunshine and pump up their team. But you can kind of read their vibe of how confident they are in themselves. And I did pick that up from what you said about Lincoln, where I felt like the confidence he had was real. It wasn't just trying to convince himself or convince us. But I felt that way about pretty much almost every single Big Ten coach we interviewed. I feel like a lot of coaches in that league are confident about their team, which is one of those things going back to what we talked about when we put together our brackets in the last segment. After those top three teams, I feel like the Big Ten has plenty of schools that are capable of kind of jumping up and being that fourth team if they get one.
Now, to be fair, we did not speak to Barry Odom. No offense.
True. That's a great point. Yeah.
We talked to a lot of teams that are excited about what they've got and what the outlook is going to be. So, some of that might be selection bias along the way.
Basketball will be here soon, Purdue fans. Don't you worry.
Hey, no. Just I was telling a neighbor of mine who's a Purdue fan. I said I am a huge fan of the hire. I am not optimistic it will take 1 year to get things going back in the right direction. So, patience. We're preaching patience around West Lafayette. Okay, Tom, your squad. You got your purple and gold. Tell us about LSU, because you've not only got them in when we don't have them in the college football playoff, you've got them winning the SEC top 2 seed.
Yeah, listen, it's the common theme for everything we're discussing going into the season is we don't really know. We know these teams are going to be good, but like anything feels possible. So if anything's possible, I look at LSU, I see them with a returning quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier, who could be the Heisman Trophy winner. He could play his way to being the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. They have talent at wide receiver. This is a very talented team. Now, there are question marks, obviously. They lose Will Anderson. They lose a bunch of offensive linemen. They have to replace it. But defensively, it's been bad. We've seen them trending in the right direction the last few years. And I think going into the second year under their new coordinator, we could see another step forward. So it's one of those situations where if things do click, and there is so much uncertainty surrounding the SEC as far as which team is going to win, because we know so many teams have the capability of doing so, LSU is not exactly a dark horse team when you think about it. This is a program that has won national titles in the very recent history. They do it. They've done it under 3 different coaches. So if things click, Brian Kelly, we know he's a good coach. He has not lived up to the expectations of what LSU hired him to yet, but that doesn't mean he can't. So I don't think it's entirely out of the circle of possibilities that LSU really climbs up and has a fantastic season.
I like that. My island that I recognized, we had Texas Tech as my winner in the Big 12. A roster that has been heavily invested in, that has been well documented. I will say they do need to make sure that at the quarterback position, they're able to keep Baron Morton healthy the whole way. They also need to do better at not blowing leads. They probably should have been in the Big 12 title race last year, if not for blown leads to TCU and others. So they got to do a better job as a coaching staff, as a team, of being able to finish the job. And then for Tulane as my winner out of the American Athletic Conference, I will say that is a little bit of a, just acknowledging that the world exists beyond Boise State. It's very easy for us to look at the Broncos after they finish inside the top 10, making the college football playoff, sort of write them in. So I'm at least going to say we need to remember that the American Athletic Conference could provide our representative there. We could see maybe even the Sun Belt champion, if they were to go out and get hot, could have a win total that the selection committee doesn't want to ignore. If Boise is 10-2 or better going into conference championship game, they might have that just sort of legacy that helps them out along the way. But if they lose a couple games, then I think we could see this being a little bit more of a discussion. I remember last year, Danny, it was almost a foregone conclusion because Boise State had such a good resume. All they had to do was win by any margin. How do you see the rest of that G5 race shaping up? Were there any other teams you entertained?
So I think this is a year we focus so much on strength of schedule with the P4 and the teams at the top. I think this is one that gets really interesting. Liberty's a team playing in Conference USA that could run the table, but they don't play one Power 4 opponent. I love that you went with Tulane. I was going to follow up and say, because they play 2 really good Power 4 opponents in Duke at home and Ole Miss on the road. So they've got 2 against those. Both of them pretty good teams from last year as well. Meanwhile, Boise State, they do play a team out of the American, which is going to be really interesting, on the road at USF to start the season, and then they play on the road at Notre Dame. If you win one of those, if you're 11-1, it's done. Whoever goes that way gets them. But if they're both 10-2, then all of a sudden I think we have to start getting into quality of losses, like how they look. And the thing that really helped Boise State last year was their loss to Oregon. Everybody was talking about how good a performance that was, and it was. So that's one where you just kind of have to keep an eye on some of these games against Power 4 opponents. How do they look in those games?
Great call. We have our answers to the test. We have the answer key. We already told you who's going to make the playoff. How about who's going to go and win it? Win every single game and win the national championship. Because coming up on the other side, we take each of our college football playoff bracket projections and we game it out. Tell you who's going to win each game and who ends up winning the national championship, hoisting that trophy down in Miami in January of 26. All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, and I've been fired up for this next segment all day long because it makes me feel like the playoffs already here. Now, I know we got 15 weeks of actual games before we even get to the college football playoff, but we'll be back here in December gaming out our playoff projections. So why don't we just go ahead and start right now? Tom, you're going to get to go first here. We will put the bracket on the screen and talk your way through how you have your playoff bracket going.
Well, I mean, I don't even know why we need to bother playing out the season at this point, because this bracket and how it's going to play out is exactly what's going to happen. We start with Texas and Kansas State in Austin. We saw last year the home field advantage that the teams in the first round got over their opponents. I don't think that's any different here. The Big 12 reunion sees Texas moving on to the next round to face Ohio State. Next in the line, we've got Boise State and Georgia. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah. Boise State's got a real shot of winning this game. Yeah, no, Georgia moves on pretty easily here. Next one up is Oregon-Penn State, a Big Ten rematch from the regular season. This time, I've got Penn State beating the Ducks, taking them down to move on to face Clemson in the next round. Second straight year, the Nittany Lions move on from the first round of the playoff. And then finally, Alabama-Miami, one heck of a television matchup. I've got Alabama taking the Canes down. I just think that overall, talent-wise, the home field advantage will prove to be too much for the Canes. So now we move on to the second round. We are no longer on campus. We are in some neutral sites. Ohio State, Texas. Where have I seen this before? I don't know. Give me the Buckeyes beating Texas for the third straight time in the last year. Next spot, Notre Dame, Georgia. Where have I seen this before? Once again, I see Notre Dame taking out the Bulldogs in a very close, tightly contested battle. I think that'd be a great game, honestly. I hope it does happen. Next, we've got Clemson going against Penn State. They do it again. Penn State's heading back to the semifinals. Our first actual upset of the college football playoff. The Nittany Lions take down the Tigers. And then LSU, Alabama, a game that we never get tired of watching. This time, I've got the Tigers moving on past the Tide. LSU moves to the next round. So now we're in our little Final Four, our semifinals. Ohio State versus Notre Dame. Where have I seen this before, ladies and gentlemen? I don't know. It feels like history just keeps repeating itself, and it does, because this time Ohio State once again takes down the Irish. The Buckeyes are heading back to the title game to defend their national title. Who will they be facing? LSU. The Tigers take down the Lions, and they get the gumbo going, and they move into the national title game. And once we get there, yes, that's right, I'm not just in on the LSU Tigers. I am all in on the LSU Tigers. They are taking the title. Ohio State will not repeat. It's coming back home to the SEC.
Oh, man. Wow. I tell you what, history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme, and that is just a chorus of rhyming right there. I love what Tom did. Our juices are flowing. Danny, I kind of feel like we just need to power through. Danny, let me see your predictions now. Let's go.
All right, let's go. Let's start off the bracket here. Where are we going? What spot are we going to? Let's start off at the top where we've got a little ACC, SEC matchup. Louisville, the surprise team from the ACC. Oh, that's Bud's. I don't want to look at Bud's. I want to look at mine. If we could get that one back there to make sure I'm breaking down the right games, because I don't know which way he went when he picked them. Or sweet. All right, we'll get mine back up on cam in a second.
We'll do a little hard.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, LSU, Georgia. I'm not going to get too cute. I'm going to say Georgia gets it done against Louisville, surprise team from the ACC, but a little bit too much. So Georgia moves on in that one. Next up, I got Boise State against Notre Dame, another matchup. I think this is going to be an annual tradition. Who gets to host a home game against the group of five for a blowout and a party? This year, it's Notre Dame. They move on, beating the Boise State squad. Then another couple surprise, a little Big Ten action here. USC, my surprise team against Oregon. I am actually going to have USC getting it done, advancing on, bullish on the Trojans, winning, not only getting to the playoffs, but winning a game to face Alabama. And then another one, a little bit of a surprise from the SEC, Ole Miss against Kansas State. Guess what? That's right. I'm having them knock off the Big 12 champion Kansas State Wildcats to advance on. All right, the other side of the bracket, as we keep things rolling along here, when we go up to the other side, the next round here, Georgia against Penn State. I'm going to go with Penn State advancing on. You'll see another SEC team eliminated there. I'm trusting James Franklin, all the returning firepower. And then Ohio State, Notre Dame. I think this is where Notre Dame's schedule catches up to them. A little bit too much of a cakewalk until here. Ohio State moves on to face Penn State in a semifinal matchup. This is where the USC Cinderella story comes to an end, though. They're going to get knocked off from Alabama, the SEC champ. And another SEC team goes down, and Clemson in that neutral site quarterfinal. So I'm going to have Clemson over Ole Miss advancing to the semifinals, which sets up some pretty compelling matchups. Penn State, another potential third time we could see these teams if my predictions are true. Penn State wins that tiebreaker to go on to the national championship. And Clemson, Bama, another matchup that we've seen quite a bit. I'm going to trust Clemson to get it done. For the third year in a row, no SEC team in the title game, and your national champion, James Franklin, gets it done. The Penn State Nittany Lions with Drew Aller and company, all that similar theme. Guys returning to do something special. Your Nittany Lions, your national champ.
From Penn State never winning to Penn State beating Georgia, Ohio State, and Clemson in consecutive weeks. That's insane.
Got to burst through sometime. You know?
Look, the joy that Danny had every single time he said, and an SEC team eliminated.
I mean, look, Bobby Bowden couldn't win the big one until he did. Tom Osborne couldn't win the big one until he did, right? Like Mac Brown.
Dabo Swinney, another one.
Yeah.
Good points.
Yep.
Great points, Bud. All right, Bud, show us your bracket and take us through how you see it playing out.
All right, so let's start here in the top left. I do have Oregon taking down Utah in a classic Pac-12 rematch, so they'll go ahead and take on Georgia. We'll get to that in a second. Much like Danny, I have Boise State being the sacrificial lamb from the G5, having to head this time to Tuscaloosa, so Alabama handles business easily. This is interesting. So Dabo Swinney's former D coordinator, Brent Venables, heads back, and I have Oklahoma pulling the upset over Clemson. Just not as much of a cake-flipping guy as some on this show. So setting up a Red River rivalry rematch, which is pretty awesome. Miami Notre Dame, another regular season rematch, probably a classic. Maybe a little higher scoring in this one than the season opener as the offenses kick into gear. I have the Irish coming out on top in this one. So they'll go play Ohio State in a rematch of last year's Natty. All right, let's go to the other side. Or no, here we go. All right, so Oregon, Georgia, again, much like a couple years ago when they opened the season, I do have Georgia pasting Oregon and former Kirby Smart protege Dan Lanning in that one. I have Alabama taking down Penn State in an upset. Look, Penn State, nice year last year, good team. They still did not beat a single team that was top 15 in the SP Plus ratings. So until they do that, I'm going to pick the team that I think is more talented and a little more proven. I do have Texas taking down the Sooners there to get to the semis, and I have Ohio State over the Irish. So nice little rematch again. Pretty good games last year. And here I have Alabama pulling the upset over Georgia. I think quarterback matters in that one. And then I have Texas taking down Ohio State. So 3 out of the 4 teams in the finals I have as SEC teams this year. Last year they had a really bad year. This year I think the SEC is back with a vengeance. And I have Alabama taking down Ohio State to take home the title to Tuscaloosa.
Well,
Ohio State's like Jon Snow pulling the sword from Game of Thrones, just going by itself against the entire SEC.
The North, yes. Which is how it's been for
right there in your analysis, Bud. But Ty Simpson officially named the starter for the Crimson Tide. A surprise, as expected. How'd you see that one, at least in terms of our progress through the preseason?
I'm pleased with the result here. Obviously, Russell, the 5-star freshman they signed, probably made somewhat of a push. He's a supreme talent. But Ty Simpson is a member of Bud Elliott's team for the Heisman draft we did on Cover 3, I think on this very show. So very pleased with that result here.
Yeah, you got like some guys you're getting a little nervous about, other guys you're more enthused by. Simpson certainly there. All right, Chip's CFP bracket. Texas A&M and Ole Miss, SEC foes, former SEC West foes. They don't play this year in the regular season. I do have them playing here. I've got Ole Miss taking care of business at home in what should be an incredible atmosphere. Georgia over Tulane. The Dogs might have some rough history in New Orleans, but this game is in Athens. Dogs advance. Then I've got Clemson over Texas Tech. I think home field definitely matters in this one as they get into the quarterfinals. Not a one-and-done showing. And then here, I've got Notre Dame over Oregon. We saw what that home environment was like in South Bend for that frigid playoff game last year. I think that'll be, again, another great spot for the Fighting Irish. Moving on to the quarterfinals, I've got Penn State defeating Ole Miss in one of our bowl game quarterfinals. I've got Ohio State over Georgia. Ohio State just might have a little bit of a higher gear, especially that this deep in the season. Then I've got Alabama over Notre Dame and Clemson over Texas in the other two quarterfinals. Man, we really are starting to set up some familiar foes here. And then Penn State over Ohio State. Like Danny, this could be the third time we see them play, and I've got the Nittany Lions getting it done on the big stage thanks to their experience. Then Alabama over Clemson. So Penn State and Alabama in the national championship game, and I've got the Nittany Lions and James Franklin once again having its Tom Osborne, its Bobby Bowden, the big breakthrough moment for the coach who supposedly couldn't win the big one. I've got Penn State going through and winning it all. All right.
I like it. We all got a little bit of something different.
All got a little bit of something different. Well, we've got one thing left to do. Every single Tuesday until the season starts, we're going to leave you with a win total of the week. So coming up on the other side, the win total that you should have your eye on and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, we have one thing left to do, and that is get you on your way with the win total of the week. We got a couple that we want to spotlight. Bud Elliott, you've given us liberty. You've given us a lot of good deep cuts. This time, maybe a power conference one folks aren't paying attention to. What's your win total of the week?
Yeah, Chip. So this is largely injury related, but I'm going to go ahead and go Virginia under 5.5 wins. I previously thought they had a chance to make a bowl. The schedule is very favorable, but they keep losing important guys in the offensive line and in the secondary. I think your margins at a school like UVA are pretty thin. So when the injury luck doesn't go your way, especially this early in the season, it does make me want to go under. So Cavs under 5.5.
All right. We also got one from Tom. Tom, where do you want to go?
I mean, I've literally picked this team to win the national title on this show not too long ago, and their win total is only sitting at 8.5. Odds are they probably have to win at least 9 games if they're going to win the national title. Give me LSU over 8.5 and watch those games at the Swigwam in St. Pete.
Nice. He's even got a spot. That's great. Great product placement.
Great product placement. LSU over, Virginia under. We are in win totals season, and that means that when you subscribe to the Cover 3 podcast, either on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, you're just getting nothing but win total analysis every single week. On Monday, we did the first half of the SEC. On Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, watch live, come and get the second half. Next week, we'll be going through the Big Ten. Then it's win totals locks. Then it's week 0 locks. Then we get into the throes of the regular season. Fired up to be breaking it down every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday on YouTube, and every Tuesday here with you on CBS Sports Network. And you can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fornelli. You can follow him at Danny Kanell. Follow him at Bud Elliott. Follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See ya.
Yeah.